Good morning, everyone. 17 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to the Sunrise Show. Craig Froelich in, and thrilled to welcome onto the program Utah State Representative Ken Ivory, representing District 47 in the great state of Utah. But he's also the president of the American Lands Council, AmericanLandsCouncil.org. And when I brought Ken on this morning, I was just talking to him about the Stout Creek Fire Tour and the issue of all of this land. You have the 265 decks of logs amounting to 1.5 million board feet. But then on federal land, any land that would be federally protected, the ranger, Donna Owens, said, well, they would put the sale up on a stewardship sale. The county would not get any of the proceeds from the logs sold, but if they were to have a public timber sale and sell the logs as logs, the county would get 25% of the revenue. And Ken, when I told you that, your response was, and good morning, sir, tell me about...
Good morning, Craig. It unfortunately is just a continuation of the kind of bureaucratic, we call it museum management, Craig. You know, what happens is we've been told for years that the way to get healthy air, water, wildlife, and safe and vibrant communities and abundant recreation is to have bureaucrats thousands of miles away make the decision, and they lock up the lands like they're in a museum. You know what's in museums, right?
Right.
Dead and dusty stuff. And unfortunately, our lands are being managed this way, and it just doesn't have to be this way. I mean, we just looked at Canada. Canada, over the last decade, as recently as last year, they realized that this centralized bureaucratic management does not work for unique lands, cannot work for unique lands. And Canada, our neighbor to the north, is teaching the United States about liberty, property, self-governance of unique lands. They transferred land, water, resources to the provinces and territories. And Craig, guess what? They're getting better outcomes economically and environmentally. We've got to free the land so that we get the people that know the lands best and manage them like a garden. You get the gardener who knows the condition, knows the soil, knows the climate, knows the pests, knows the diseases, and is there for all the unforeseeable circumstances that always seem to happen, rather than having people thousands of miles away do a one-size. I mean, imagine somebody says, we're going to take your backyard garden and we're going to take a bureaucratic policy, and everybody does their garden the same.
Oh, I know it. I get it. It's like, I thought about that. What if everyone had gardens and they never weeded it once the entire season?
Right. Yeah, I mean, you know better than anyone. So with this kind of bureaucratic museum management, right, hands off, don't touch, overgrown forests all over the West, it's tragic, right? You're getting, instead of 50 trees, 100 trees to the acre, we're getting hundreds to thousands, and they compete for the same air, the same water, the same nutrients, the same sunlight, and because they're competing, they're not able to fend off the pests and fend off the diseases the way they would naturally. They're dying all over the West, and now they're just tinder for the next catastrophic fire that, unfortunately, you all know so well, but that's just set up for, the next state, maybe Idaho, it may be Utah, it may be New Mexico, Arizona's had their share as well, but it's just a catastrophe. So it's time to follow the example of Canada. It's time to free the lands. People can get, as you mentioned, more information at AmericanLandsCouncil.org. There's a Take Action tab. Get on there. There's a petition. There's a survey. There's a way to volunteer and get involved. But this is moving all throughout the United States because this is one of probably, I would say, the greatest environmental catastrophe of our lifetime. I mean, watersheds are decimated for decades.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
Wildlife incinerated alive in the millions, Craig.
Oh, my gosh.
Think about this. This was Eastern Washington a couple of years ago. A little bear cub. They called her Cinder Bear. She's caught in this catastrophic fire, walking through, trying to find her way out. She's burned up to her elbows. Luckily, she finds a place that's not completely an inferno, and they take her, and they nurse her back to health. She's the lucky one. This bear cub burned in her ears and everything.
Ugh.
They release her into another overgrown forest, but she's the lucky one because millions of animals are just incinerated alive. And that's called environmentalism by some to allow these conditions.
Oh, I know it. And these fires that burn, in fact, this last year, wasn't it the most 8 or 9 million acres ever burned, the most ever? But no one's talking about the lost wildlife.
Right. The photos that we've got are they're just heartbreaking. You've got, elk, deer, bear, eagles, just incinerated alive.
Yeah.
You know, this is a tremendous catastrophe. But now what you're going to see, and you're seeing, is it's not just the fire. So once the land has been denuded and you have no ground cover, well, then as soon as you get a few drops of rain, everything comes down. And the fisheries, the Blue Ribbon fisheries, gone for decades. In Utah, we had the Huntington fire. Blue Ribbon fishery, we can't even – this was like 3, 4, 5 years ago now. We still can't even stock fish. There's so much silt that comes down with even the slightest bit of rain on the runoff. And so water supplies are damaged for decades. The watersheds, the fisheries, the habitat. This is a huge environmental issue. Not to mention, then, you're shutting down economies, right? So you have economies that used to be vibrant and thriving. A perfect example, right in Josephine County, Oregon, right?
Oh,
you
absolutely.
had Sheriff Gilbertson. I stayed at his house. He used to have 30 sheriff's deputies that were funded from timber receipts. Now they've done the museum management, lock off the forest, and so because the funding has been completely cut back, he's down to 2 sheriff's deputies that can only run from 9 to 5. Woman calls 911. This was on NPR.
I know.
Woman calls 911. Help! Someone's beating down my door. And 911, all they can do is say, "Can you ask him to go away or call back tomorrow?" And that woman was raped and brutalized in her own home because the timber harvesting, tending it like a garden, has been completely shut down. The sheriff's office is defunded. Education is defunded. You've got a catastrophic forest, and people are getting raped in their own homes. It doesn't have to be this way.
No, it doesn't. It's absolutely crazy. And we followed that story quite extensively. And, the sad thing is, Ken, is that if anyone gets angry because they shut down the libraries here and they had, off and on, short schedule during the week. And it's they actually had the OSU Extension Office was faced shut down, and they've increased funding now to keep it back open. And the library district is their own separate entity now. But for a time, and everyone gets angry. Well, the fact that the financial stream, the revenue stream is gone, and it's a matter of that the citizens of Oregon need to stand up. We've got this break coming up, Ken, and I want to talk to you more about what people can do, and because the tide is swinging, courtesy of AmericanLandsCouncil.org. I mean, what's happening is the real truth about lands in trust and how they were done for the central states and how they can be done for the western states as well. So we've got Utah State Representative Ken Ivory on with us. He's also the president of the American Lands Council, landscouncil.org, and we're just happy to have him on because he is leading the way. And quite frankly, a lot of county commissioners, all of that, they're paying attention. And Ken, it's just great what you're doing. So stay on the phone and we'll be right back. More in the Sunrise Show on News Radio 880 KCMX after this quick break.
So get up. Top of the morning to you.
Good morning, everyone. 33 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to the Sunrise Show. Craig Froelich in, and we're continuing with Utah State Representative Ken Ivory, representing the great state of Utah in District 47. But he's also the president of the American Lands Council, AmericanLandsCouncil.org. And it's interesting. And Ken is an attorney by trade. And Ken, you've got to be amazed when you look at the other states in the Union had this happen to them as the territory. I mean, Louisiana Purchase, Illinois, Missouri, all through there. And then they, as they became states, had their constitution written and their state representatives and their Congress, I mean, the legislature rather in the states, then the land was awarded back to them, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So states that came into the Union even after Oregon that have the same type of statehood agreements. So you look at Michigan and Illinois and Arkansas, Louisiana, and then, of course, Craig, that great western state clear over there of Florida? It used to be 90% federally controlled. Florida, 90% federally controlled. Florida used to send resolutions to Congress. We can't educate our kids, grow our economy. People are leaving our state because you're not disposing of the lands like you promised. Illinois was 96% federally controlled for decades. Orlando Ficklin, Democratic member of Congress, ran a bill that said, no, you've got to transfer these lands. You've got to keep the same promise. We're not a state if you don't honor this promise. Well, There was a Democrat senator from Missouri, Thomas Hart Benton. Benton County, Oregon is named after him.
Wow.
He said, I resolved, my election to the Senate found me doing battle for changing this system of disposing of the public lands. He says the federal government was a monopolizer of the vacant lands of the West. He's talking about Florida and Iowa and Louisiana and Missouri. The federal government was a monopolizer of the vacant lands of the West, and like all monopolies, it results in a hardship. And here's what he said, Craig. He said, members of Congress, and I would say that governors and attorneys general and state representatives and county commissioners should fix their eyes steadily on the period of the speedy extinction of the federal title to all the lands within their respective borders. And Craig, they did. Those states banded together. They were way worse than even Nevada is today.
It's amazing.
And they compelled Congress to transfer the lands. And so this coming year, we have a bunch of people that want jobs from us. We have people that want jobs at the county commissioner level and at the state representative level and at the governor and attorney general and the congressional level. And they want jobs. Well, our job is to hire and inspire leaders that understand there is a solution big enough to this environmental catastrophe. There is a solution big enough to the economic malaise. There's an economic renaissance just waiting to be unleashed. There's a solution big enough to our military being completely dependent on China for critical rare earth elements for our military to even function, and they're locked up all over the Western land. So there are solutions big enough. This is the only solution big enough. And so get on the AmericanLandsCouncil.org webpage, go to the Take Action section, volunteer. There's also an American Lands Council Oregon Facebook page. So get on there. We need to start gathering these rich stories of this economic and environmental destruction and get people on board that the solution is within our own hands.
You know, there really is. And the next thing, of course, is you think, okay, Oregon, 53% managed and controlled by the federal government. And I talk to my listeners all the time. I said, all the states on the East Coast, they have 10% or less now. And I said, imagine Oregon if we had 10% of our lands managed and controlled by the federal government, and we had the other 43% that we could do something with. And everyone is up in arms about minimum wage, fighting and clawing to get $15 an hour. And the employers are going, wait, we're going to put us out of business. And yet, living wage job with timber and wood products industry across the nation, and we are the best at growing Doug fir and sugar pine in the world. And you would think we could harness that particular issue and harness our natural resources and build family wage jobs.
Yeah, and have a healthier forest in the process, right? So, you know, like we were talking about Canada. Canada's done this very thing. They transferred land, water resources to the provinces and territories, and they're getting better outcomes environmentally and economically. So there's a solution big enough. It's just a matter of, you know, in our system of government, we're the boss, right? It says deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. But if we want to be treated like the boss, we have to act like the boss. And so next year, it's our job to hire employees, to hire representatives. And so we can either hire representatives that sound nice and have cool hair, or we can hire representatives that understand, like Thomas Hart Benton of Benton County, Oregon, did, that said, no, we're going to fix our eyes steadily on the period and the speedy extinction of the federal title to these lands so that we can manage them for better outcomes environmentally and economically.
You know, Ken, I want to find out from the pushback from the environmentalists and the conservationists that, you know, the carbon, they don't ever talk about the carbon footprint. They don't ever talk about the loss of wildlife and the loss of ecosystems when these catastrophic wildfires burn and just completely sterilize the land and the soil. What do they have to say about that when you bring this up? What's the pushback? Because I think we could get them on the bandwagon if we could show them, hey, great stewardship, the real meaning of stewardship, helping our wildlife and lowering the carbon footprint.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's not working, right? Federal bureaucratic management from thousands of miles away, museum management, it's not working by all accounts. And there's very little that they can say because the data is just so overwhelming that this isn't working. So some of these groups, the most extreme of these groups, they actually make money by suing the federal government, and then their fees are paid by the taxpayers. It's called the Equal Access to Justice Act, and so they have this perverse incentive to keep the environmental lockdown that's ruining the lands, to keep that going. And so unfortunately, in the Forest Service as well, now their budget is substantially more than 50% of their revenue goes to fire suppression, and so they call it the fire economy in the Forest Service. It's almost like the more we burn, the more we earn is the new motto. It's tragic.
Well, what's interesting, Ken, it's so sad and sick because here's Oregonians, we're the ones that lose the most. We have the most to lose here.
Right, and the problem is with these tinderbox catastrophic fire conditions, that's not something that you just recover from in a year or two, or even a decade or two. This is generational, the effect on watersheds, the effect, as you were mentioning, on carbon sequestration, on the oxygenation. Losing a forest impacts the entire ecosystem, the economy, the life and livelihood of the people of Oregon and throughout the West. And in fact, Craig, in Salt Lake, we couldn't see the mountains on either side of I-15 because of the smoke from the fires in Oregon and Washington this year. We couldn't see the mountains for 2-3 weeks. And so just the carcinogens that come from the forest dwarf what comes up of tailpipes and smokestacks. So if we care about the environment, we should care about maintaining a healthy and productive forest, just like you mentioned with the garden, right? If you just go hands off on your garden, you get, the weeds grow up, your plants don't grow, the good plants don't grow, and the bad ones do, and so you have neither a healthy nor a productive garden. But if you have a productive garden, it's also a healthy garden. The same with the forest. Give you an example. So in California, University of California Merced scientists concluded a study in June of this year, and they said if they just harvested the Sierra Nevadas just to the sustainable tree density, 50 to 100 trees per acre or so, they would conserve substantially more than 250 trillion, with a T, trillion gallons of water a year. That's way more than 2 million families worth of water. And you would have a healthier forest, and you would have revenue that would fund public safety and education, and you get win-win-win. And now under this bureaucratic lockdown museum management across the board, we're getting lose on the environment, lose on the economy, lose on watershed, lose on wildlife. But again, it doesn't have to be this way. It's time for us to all to step up. People get to the Oregon American Lands Council Oregon Facebook page, get to AmericanLandsCouncil.org, the Take Action tab, sign up as a volunteer, take the survey, sign the petition. It's time to start hiring and inspiring leaders in 2016 that understand there is a solution big enough for the environmental catastrophe, for the economic malaise that's happening throughout Oregon and the West and the nation, for the military dependence on critical elements. We're dependent on China, for Pete's sakes, to even put a fighter jet in the air when we've got the resources sitting right there.
Ken, it's just unbelievable that this is going on. And when you mention that 250 billion gallons of water, that's 250 trillion gallons of water that could be saved from, like you said, we're just proper forest management, you would get the attention, you would think that would work. Was interesting. I mentioned on the break, U.S. Senator Ron Wyden for the state of Oregon, and he was talking about the Travel Oregon estimates travel and tourism contribute to about $10.3 billion to the state's economy. They talk about 100,000 jobs in Oregon. And all I remember is when the smoke came into the valley, the musicians couldn't practice outside. The Elizabethan Theater for the Shakespearean Festival, they had to close because they couldn't be outside. All the rafters, all the rafting and tour guides down the river, they had to cancel. And then right behind that, all the tourism. And then you had the people canceling their hotel reservations. They don't buy food at the restaurants. They don't buy gas at the gas stations. They go to some other state. And I'm thinking, look what the precipice that Senator Ron Wyden is putting us on and having us build our tourism when you said we're going to be next year could easily get to 10 million acres burned.
Yeah, we're approaching 10 million acres burned this year. It's record, an all-time record of acres burned. I mean, it's almost like the Forest Service is managing the forest for maximum combustion. You really almost have to try to get it this way. And so what you asked about, what are some of the counter arguments from different groups, and some will say, well, states can't manage these lands, and you say, well, it's not really hard to beat an F. If somebody's getting an F minus, it's only up from here, But in reality, the Property and Environmental Research Center, PERC it's called, out of Bozeman, Montana, they did a study that came out in April of this year And they said by nearly all accounts, federal lands are in trouble, both economically and environmentally. For every dollar that the federal government spends managing public lands, it loses 27 cents.
Oh, my God.
For every dollar that the states spend managing the millions of acres of public lands that states already manage effectively, the states generate, Craig, $14.51 on average positive net revenue.
It's unbelievable. Therein lies the numbers right there. 27 cents lost if the federal government manages the lands. And what was it, $14?
Yeah, $14.51 on average for states that manage public lands, positive net revenue, right?
Unbelievable.
So, and then when you think about it, then you've got in the West more than 50% of all land west of the Rockies locked up, and so counties are dependent on what they call PILT payments, payment in lieu of taxes.
Right.
So from the Revolutionary War, when the public land question started, when states entrusted their partnership, their union, with their western lands and said, we're going to put these in trust to pay the debt of the Revolutionary War, but we're only going to use the lands to create new equal states and use the proceeds to pay the debt. It started in 1780, Craig, this whole question. And so for 200 years, the federal government, it was then codified in the Constitution in Article 4, Section 3, federal government knew it was supposed to dispose of the lands like a trustee until 1976. Congress got a bright idea because everybody forgot their history and just said, hey, we're going to keep these lands in federal ownership now, but we'll give you payment in lieu of the taxes and the revenue you would otherwise generate if you governed yourself like everyone east of the Rockies. Well, what happens is Congress only pays whatever it feels like, whenever it feels like, in these critical transfer payments, payment in lieu of taxes that our friends from the east have to pony up. But last year in the Farm Bill, they said, we're going to hold hostage $400 million in PILT payments throughout the West to increase the federal spending by $1 trillion in food stamps and farm subsidies.
Unbelievable.
So they hold PILT hostage and garner all the Western votes and increase federal spending $1 trillion.
Yeah,
it's politically, economically, constitutionally, this is a critical issue.
Yeah, it's absolutely, just so wrong. And that's where we went off track, Ken, was right there at the PILT, the payment in lieu of taxes. We should have screamed bloody murder on that whole thing. And unfortunately, Ken, we have to leave it there. We're out of time, but it's fascinating. And I so appreciate the work you're doing. We are making the turn. People are understanding that they do have more rights and that the states can do more things. And it's just through great work like yours that this is realized. Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Ivory, Utah State Representative for District 47 and the President of the American Lands Council. Do yourself a favor, get to AmericanLandsCouncil.org. You won't believe the maps, the charts, the data, the history. It's all factual. It's just fascinating stuff. And Ken, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's just great.
Thanks, Craig.
All right, good deal. Thanks again. And happy Thanksgiving to you, sir, and your family.
Appreciate it.
All right, take care. More in the Sunrise Show. We'll continue. We got to get to a break, and then we'll come right back. Oh, we got closing thoughts on what's going on. You too can be a patriot. Lean in, be a part of the show, be a part of the program. Always count on your voice. You can call us, find us on the web, kcmxam.com. All of our links are there, and the phone number, 541-772-8255, along with our Facebook page. We're dialoguing all day long. Americans, patriots, need only apply. We'll be right back on the Sunrise Show after this quick break on News Radio 880 KCM.